Welcome again, everyone. This is Jennifer Rennie again from the Center for Courts. Welcome to the monthly CIP All Call event. And we've got a packed agenda today, so I know folks are still logging in, but we're going to go ahead and get started. So the Center for Courts team is very excited about today's call. The purpose of today's call is to provide you an overview of the 5 CIP meetings and to talk about where we go from here. So we're going to provide you with a summary of some of the major trends in terms of projects that you're all working on. We're going to share with you some examples from states, and I'd like to thank in advance Rachel Neff from Delaware, Mark Harris from Louisiana, and Kelly Wagner from Michigan. And then we're going to discuss the best way for states working on similar issues to connect and work together. So as we like to do to get folks chatting in the chat box and to continue to get to know each other better, we're going to start off with an icebreaker question. And this month's question is, what was your favorite summer job that you had as a kid? And if you didn't have a summer job as a kid, type into the chat box an unusual or fun job that you've had in the past. These are great. Bingo caller. This is great. If you're just joining, our icebreaker question is the summer job you had as a kid or an unusual or fun job that you had in the past. Judy Nord, roller skate waitress. This is great. Wonderful. Thanks, everyone. Such a great way to start off the call. Thank you for playing. So I'm now going to turn it over to Stacey Obrecht, who's going to, as I said, start off with giving you a scan or the themes or topics of what people are working on with regard to your joint projects.
Thanks, Jen. So we took all of the information that we got from you and from work planning during the CIP grantee meetings, all the different regional meetings, and pulled out where all the states were in the change management process. So those 5 phases of the change management process. And then also kind of categorized into topical areas what people are working on for their joint project with the agency. Just as a way to kind of give you a national scan. I know you all know what you're working on and potentially what some of the other folks in your region are working on, but we're hoping this will give you a view nationally. So this first graph that we have is actually showing all of the 5 phases and then the numbers of states that are in those phases. So as you can see, most of the states across the nation are in phase 1 or phase 3. So they're looking at kind of what are their needs, what do they need to work on, and what is the data, or they're looking at kind of what's the solution or the intervention that they're going to choose. And then we have kind of the least number of states in that last phase of actually evaluating the findings and looking at applying that and kind of starting over in that new, the new process to go around that circle again. Leave that up for just a minute. Okay, and then this graph is busy, but what we tried to do was, again, categorize the different joint projects with the agencies into different topical areas that would be language that everyone is using across the country. And so as you can see from this, it starts on the right with permanency being the largest number of projects that states are working on, and timeliness coming in as a close second, and then goes around the circle to show you which other projects, with ICWA being the least number of people working on it. And this is, again, pulled from kind of the entry of the work plans and what it was called. So there may be a permanency project on ICWA, and it's just in the permanency location. So not an exact one-to-one, but getting the states in there. We had, I think, 48 states that we were able to categorize into these categories and show you kind of where the work is happening and on what topics, which I think will come up again as we move forward in the call. So are there any questions about this graph or the other one? All right. Christina, I think I'll pass it back to you.
Thanks. We'll now turn things over to Tim to hear some state highlights of state projects. Tim?
Great. Hello, everyone. So the way that we're going to do this is just have a very brief conversation or interview with 3 different people about their joint state projects. So we're going to talk first with Rachel Neff from Delaware, and then Mark Harris from Louisiana, and then Kelly Wagner from Michigan. And what I'd encourage you to do, because we have super short amount of time with each one of them, if you have questions that you'd like to ask them, I'd encourage you to type those into the chat. We'll either answer them verbally as we're talking, or I'll encourage Rachel and Mark and Kelly after they're done talking to just kind of scan the chat and see if there are things that they can answer for you. We also have a couple downloadable resources that you might find interesting in the resources pod, which is in kind of the center bottom of your screen, and we'll get to that as we go. So the first person that I'd like to take just a little bit of time to talk with is Rachel Neff from Delaware. So Rachel, are you there?
Yes. Hi, Tim.
Hey, Rachel. So just to start out, can you tell folks a little bit about what is the joint project in Delaware?
Sure. So what we're looking at here in Delaware is how to improve our front-end parent engagement work with our parents who are involved with our dependency and neglect cases. And we wanted to tackle that by looking at our work with our parent attorneys and thinking about how we could think differently about our approach with parents from the beginning, as well as thinking about what we could do with the state agency and thinking about how we can improve some of our visitation work on the front end with parents as soon as they become involved in these cases. So the overarching goal, though, is to ultimately improve our front-end parent engagement work with the goal on the longer permanency goal of improving our reunification outcomes with our families. And that's obviously a longer-term goal. And we're hoping to achieve this through a pilot project that we've launched, creation of Delaware-specific parent attorney standards, and creation of visitation guidelines and visitation hosts for our state.
Okay. And just so that folks know, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, wow, I can't believe we're only going to have 10 minutes on this, I really need all the details. In that center resources box, there's a document called Parent Engagement that lays out this in a little bit more detail. But Rachel, could you tell folks what stage in the change management process are you in right now?
So I think it was helpful a couple weeks ago in D.C. When we talked it through with the CBCC liaison and another individual at our table. We're pretty confident that we're in phase 4 of the plan, prepare, and implement, and we've just kind of gotten there. And I think we've been talking about this work for a little while, so I would say that's where we are now. And probably a year ago we were in the phase 1.
So it took you a year to move from phase 1 to phase 4?
Yeah, and yes, which I think is, I guess in terms of working with our partner, which obviously is the state agency and other stakeholders in the state, parent attorneys and family court, we started the initial conversation about this probably well over a year ago in terms of what do we want to do, how are we going to get there, and really revising our theory of change. I think that took took several months, I think, to work through that. And then getting the state agency at the table with us to talk through, what are we trying to do? How does it impact them? How can we really think about this in a collaborative way? That wasn't something that happened quickly, but I think once we nailed down the theory of change, then we were able to move a little bit more strategically and faster through the process. But I would say, Tim, a year might sound bad, but I think it did take us about a year to get to where we are.
Yeah. No, actually, I think it's not uncommon to do it well on a really large scale project, and what you're doing sounds pretty big to me. Collaboration takes more time, and sometimes going slow in the beginning to go fast at the end is helpful. I'm wondering if you could tell me a little bit about, you said you ended up going back during that time and kind of revising the theory of change. Can you tell me a little bit about why did that happen and what was the significance of that?
Yeah, I think, again, it was helpful to have the conversation with the CBCC liaisons about it. And I think we really wanted to, at least at a meeting a couple weeks ago, we were able to revisit our theory of change even at a later date, because we were realizing that we were kind of missing a part of our project. But even initially, I think it was just going through the revisions of making sure we were capturing what we wanted to capture is why we wanted to circle back. And so even like a year into the project, again, focusing on the visitation work, because we said that earlier, but then we didn't realize that we weren't doing much around it. It was helpful to refocus the meeting and kind of get people clear on what our plan was moving forward with visitation, and how we were going to focus on that with the project. And we had to, again, like slightly modify our theory of change. But so I think and I'm sure we might be refining it in the future, depending on when we start to evaluate the work later in the year and into next year.
So what I'm hearing you say is that it's essentially kind of an iterative process that it's good now. It's better than it was before, and you expect maybe in the future there might be even further tweaks to it. Is that right?
Yes, I would agree.
So so there might be some folks on the line here, and it looked like even in fact from our poll there were a lot of folks kind of early on early on in the process that are thinking, wow, a year to get to this, that seems like a long time. Were there particular parts of the process that were difficult or more challenging along the way?
Well, so when we actually started, because there's as I said at the beginning, a couple of components, the parent attorney standards, the social service intervention, and the visitation work group. But the communication with everybody about when we were starting and how it was going to look, I had felt that I would notify people, okay, this is happening, and then I would forget to notify someone else, or there was a piece that just wasn't clearly communicated, or we'd have offices say, hey, the social worker was reaching out to somebody in my, region, and I don't even know what's going on, So I think the learning in doing this project and working with the state agency is that we set up meetings with them to make sure that we were communicating regularly, because that was an opportunity for improvement. And then just making sure we're like that feedback loop of, we started to launch. There's some cases being screened into the project. This is what you need to know. This is, let us know how this, teaming meeting worked. Or, I think just staying in the loop about communication, even when there's missteps, has been important for, I think, continuing on. Because again, everybody's knee deep in all of their own individual work and expectations, and this is something brand new. And so it's whenever you're using brand new, it's that constant reminder of, okay, does everybody know what we're doing and when we're doing it? So, I take for granted, I'm sure everybody does, but when in reality, it's like there needs to be strategic times to check in to be clear about what's happening, when, and who needs to know. So that was hopefully answers part of that question.
Yeah, and does that happen predominantly through the kind of the regularly scheduled meetings, or do you have other tips for folks who are kind of in that same stage now where they're thinking about, well, this is going to roll out, and obviously there's a core group of people who know about it because we've been working on it, but it sounds to me that what you're talking about is how to make sure that kind of everyone else is on board. Other than regular meetings, do you have other ways that you do that? And it's okay if not. I'm just curious.
Just say no, but we probably should. Yeah. I think we have those regular meetings. Thanks. And we did again a couple weeks ago in DC. It became apparent to us that we needed to reengage another group of stakeholders involved in the work related to visitation. And even people said in the meeting, they're like, Rachel, we were talking about this back in November and December, and now, like, where, they had just had questions about where things were at. And so that group has been refocused and kind of has a clear purpose in what we're trying to achieve. So that's a good question, Tim, and I think it's going to be something we improve upon over the next 3 to 6 months.
Uh-huh. So where are you moving now? We have just another minute or two here, and I'm curious if you could just kind of let folks know where do you see this project headed next? You said you're in phase 4. It sounds like you're beginning to roll out. What do you see as kind of the challenges or the opportunities coming up for you in kind of rolling into this next phase?
Well, I think just maintaining the communication with the state agency about the work. Really, we're going to be moving in as the end of the year approaches into some of the evaluation components. So making sure that everything that we laid out that we said we were going to do in the project, that our data analyst is on board around it, and that we're following kind of the screening protocol with our social services project, so that we can get some decent data in early 2018 around our work. And then again, we really in Delaware, improving our visitation practices is something that we made a commitment to doing, and so we hope within the next 6 months to a year that we kind of have a new strategy and approach for that. And clearly, that's something that I'm so thankful that the state agency is on board and working through and crafting with us, because that's I think that's really important and going to be meaningful as we move ahead with that work. So those would be the 3 things I'd say.
Great. Thanks, Rachel. Well, I want to encourage folks, our time is up here with Rachel. What I really want to encourage folks to do is if you have questions for Rachel, to go ahead and type those in the chat. We'll respond to them that way. David was asking about your theory of change, and if you know it off the top of your head, you can tell folks, but also I'd encourage people that theory of change, I believe, is included in that resources document labeled parent engagement. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, the theory of change, it's in that document that's posted, and it's 2 long sentences, I think, but so it's posted there, or I can type it in the chat box.
Perfect. Great. Thank you very much.
Yep.
All right. So I'd like to move on to Mark Harris now from Louisiana. Are you online, Mark?
Yes, I'm right here.
Hey, Mark. So I'll just start with the same question that I started with Rachel. Can you just kind of let folks know what are you working on in terms of your joint project down in Louisiana?
We're working on improving the quality of safety decision making. Louisiana in its first 2 CFSRs performed poorly in safety outcome 2, item 3, which is safety and risk assessment and management. So our court improvement project has had a keen interest in looking at the court side of safety decision making and partnering with the agency to implement a model that they're using called advanced safety focused practice. So we're looking at improving, making sure that all stakeholders on the legal side understand terminology, and that we can have the legal stakeholders, wrap around the new model that the department is using, and hopefully we will improve the safety outcome to item 3 scores. And we also hope that by improving safety decision making, in other words, making sure that children only come into care when it's absolutely essential and that they go home as soon as it is safe to do so, that we may improve numbers around the number of short stayers. And also we hope to have some tangential effect on reducing time to permanency.
Okay, and can you tell us a little bit more about when you say kind of getting everyone on board with a common language and that kind of first part of what you're planning on doing? What is kind of concretely, what does that look like? What are you? Well,
the department's advanced safety focused practice model is in large part a mirror image of the model set forth in the ABA publication on child safety, a guide for judges and attorneys. So the state was moving from an incident-based approach of safety, where it was dealing with a finite set of circumstances, to really doing assessments and trying to determine the underlying issues and struggles that families were having that led to the incident or incidents that brought the family to the attention of the department. So they initiated a model that is very focused on ascertaining threat and understanding and defining the threat, looking at vulnerability of children or a child to the identified threat, and then assessing the protective capacity of the caregivers to protect the vulnerable child against the identified threat. So this formula for determining whether a child is safe or unsafe, while it's very elegant and when you're looking at it, it's rather complicated to apply. And we felt it was important for judges and children's attorneys and parents' attorneys and district attorneys and agency attorneys and CASAs and other folks in the courtroom to, A, understand the terminology and the framework of the new model, to understand the definitions of safe versus unsafe, to understand the purpose of safety plans vis-a-vis the purpose of case plans, and how the two were alike and how the two were very different and where the intersects were. So, understanding that the courts are really the gatekeepers in and out of foster care, it seemed urgent to us that everybody needed to understand the model the department was using, and that so that each side could support the other in the work that was being done to make sure that judges were getting the best possible information in the most timely manner that was accurate, and that understanding, helping all stakeholders understand that information drives safety decisions, and how that information is obtained, how it's framed, how it's applied, how it's assessed over time, from the beginning of the case through later points in the case when more information becomes available, and how that information is relayed back to the court. So all of the data analysis is being handled through our respective CQI committees. Court Improvement sits on the Department CQI committee, and Department sits on the Court Improvement CQI committee, so that's our point of exchange there, and that's where the data part is coming into play.
So, what stage of the process is your project in right now, in terms of?
Well, I think we're moving into phase 4. When we got to the regional meeting in Denver, we thought we had a pretty crackerjack theory of change, which we very quickly discovered could be vastly improved. And having the CBCC and CBCS folks at the table with us really helped us to take a look at our theory of change and to step it out in much more detail. And by doing that, we were able then to, I think, make a lot of refinements to our strategies and interventions. Having the theory of change stepped out as dramatically as we did really helped us to sort of give a line item method of looking at our strategies and interventions to be sure that everything was in place that needed to be in place. And we also made some pretty dramatic changes of course about implementation, which I think will ultimately benefit the project. In the course of the discussion with the experts that were there and with our team that was there, we moved more from what I guess I like to call a spray and pray approach to deciding that we really needed to go down a lot more in depth and deep rather than broad. Because as we had started going around doing the first round of trainings, what we learned was that many of the issues within the local jurisdictions are sometimes unique to the jurisdictions themselves, so that one set of problems or barriers in one jurisdiction didn't really mirror the problems or the barriers in the other jurisdiction. So we decided to circle back. Instead of expanding our training out into other jurisdictions, we just decided to double back and focus on the 4 where we had gone first, or where we're in the process of going now, in drilling down deeper and promoting the creation of safety facilitation teams, which are going to be led by judges in those particular jurisdictions, and bringing in the stakeholders to make sure that we have a clear understanding of where folks think the issues are in that jurisdiction, and then working with them through court improvement to help support strategies that will help address the issues and support what we think will be quarterly meetings of the safety facilitation teams. In the meantime, the department, through its CQI process, will be monitoring in an ongoing fashion, and we'll be getting a look at their data on a quarterly basis. So hopefully we'll begin to know. We're hoping to be able to connect the dots between some of the things that we're doing, and we're hoping that we'll see some improved outcomes.
Okay, so you're kind of you said you're kind of moving into stage 4. I'm wondering if there were parts of the process that were particularly difficult or challenging. For folks who are kind of on the front end of projects now, are the pieces of advice that you would particularly give them? I noticed one thing that you talked about was kind of the idea of depth as opposed to breadth. So that might be one lesson, kind of think about how to really drive change in individual jurisdictions.
Well,
more broadly.
Well, that's a good question. The first 4 jurisdictions we chose to go with our introductory training and education were based on data that we received from the department about fairly large urban areas that were showing the poorest performance. So we started out with the area that was showing the poorest performance, and we came down the line 1, 2, 3, 4. So we've done 4 regional training events. We've completed 3. We'll do 1 more. And so by doing that, I guess the toughest part was, realizing that if change is to really be made, it has to be done at a deeper level. That our state is suffering from a huge turnover rate at the department, so there are people coming in and moving out, and trying to think about things that we could sort of steady in the process that would sort of provide ballast for the system over a long period of time. And so, owing to the fact that, the judiciary is pretty stable in these locations and has been for a number of years, and is very invested in the work they are doing, that we thought by strengthening and drilling down in those jurisdictions that would help provide some stability over time as the department and court improvement work to sort of address some of the other issues that result from staff turnover.
Okay. So what I hear you to a certain degree, it was a kind of an opportunistic engagement, right? You're looking, one is data driven, so kind of looking at where there are the biggest problems, but also looking at where you're engaged with people, or you have stability in judiciary or things like that where you could engage. Is that accurate?
Right. And really talking to folks and understanding the power in some of the various roles. I think probably the power of the district attorneys in safety decision making had been underestimated to some extent. And we realized that they were critical gatekeepers in the local jurisdictions. They're the ones that were setting the dockets. They were the ones that were making decisions. They were the ones showing up at continued custody hearings. They were the ones that were filing petitions. So we realized in the process that we really needed to reach out and engage with them in a much deeper manner, so that we could have their influence, have their ability to sort of help steer the process, because we found out that the courts in these jurisdictions rely heavily on the district attorneys, and I think that's something that we had probably underestimated. And so that's just one example of going deeper just by the feedback that we were getting, going around and doing some very basic sort of introductory training on helping people understand the formula and the definitions, and that foster care is the safety plan of last resort. we started learning sort of qualitatively the interactions we were having with the individuals at the training events, that there were a lot of other things going on that we could not have known but for the fact that we were on the ground there in the jurisdictions themselves.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Mark. I really appreciate your sharing with us. For folks who are interested in more details around Louisiana's strategic plan, it's in the resources section. You can download it there. Jen was kind enough also in the bottom left-hand corner to post the theory of change, which you can scroll through. I really encourage folks, if you have questions, to go ahead and type them in the chat. I noticed Judy had typed in a couple. Rachel, she had typed in one right above your entry. If you could, if you have an answer to that in the chat, that would be great.
Okay.
And Mark, it looks like maybe there's one in there for you now too about Louisiana.
Okay. Sure.
So thank you, Mark. Thank you very much.
Yep. Happy to help.
So next up is Kelly Wagner from Michigan. Kelly, are you on?
Hello, Tim and fellow CIP colleagues.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great, thanks. So Kelly put together for us a couple of slides. So if she tells me when to click, I will click for her.
All right.
Well, I'll just start with you, Kelly, the same way I started with everyone else. Can you just tell us what's your project? What are you working on in Michigan?
Yes. So our joint data project is to develop and distribute to courts a new data report on child and family well-being. And as you mentioned, I have just a few slides that won't take very long to run through, but it'll keep me on track. So if you could go on to page 2. So, of course, the first step in the change management process is identifying and assessing your needs, which we did with our CIP data committee. And the determinations that were made in that committee, it is a multidisciplinary committee with agency representation, attorneys, court staff, et cetera. And there were some important determinations made when we were thinking about what kind of joint data project would we like to see. And the very first one that everybody agreed to was that we would like to see something on child well-being. And that wasn't to say that permanency and safety are not important, but that Michigan hasn't really focused on well-being to the extent that we have on safety and permanency. So we also determined that well-being data is not really easily available to courts, even though it'll be measured in the Child and Family Services Review, which for Michigan is next year. And it's also, we have several child well-being factors in our modified settlement agreement with children's rights. So we ultimately concluded that by developing and providing well-being data to the courts, they can help drive improvement.
Can you tell us just a little bit about what can I just ask a question real quick that strikes me seriously? When you say well-being data, what does that mean? Like, what kinds of things are you looking at there?
Well, that actually kind of goes into my next slide.
Next slide.
That was the very first thing we had to look at was what well-being data do we really have easy access to? The first thought that we came up with was education, but Michigan doesn't have really good education data in our child welfare system, the StackWith system right now. So what we did was we had to look at what the department has, what we have access to, and we came across this Department of Health and Human Services monthly management report. And you'll see on the screen, this is everything in their monthly management report. And each of these factors have either very specific requirements in the law or in policy. And so they are trackable. And what we determined was that the 5 measures on the right are the ones that we would focus on. We thought that those were the ones that the court could ask about during court hearings and drive some change. Now, at the same time, the Department of Health and Human Services at the local level, at the county level, they are using this monthly management report with their caseworkers. So it's a dual approach to have the department county officers meeting with their staff regularly about these issues, and then also have the court during court hearings ask about these 5 issues on the right, and we thought that dual approach might be the force that we needed to really drive improvement. We also thought that these 5 measures on the right really can improve child and family well-being. So, for example, the caseworkers have specific requirements on children's dental exams, for example. Anytime a child enters foster care, they have to have a comprehensive dental exam within a certain amount of days. So that's recorded in the SACWIS system, and this report is generated through the SACWIS system. All right. Next page is our theory of change, which I won't read for everybody. Everybody can kind of read it, but I do want to give a shout out to Eva Klain for her wonderful facilitation assistance at our Region 5 annual meeting in Chicago this year. Eva helped us to kind of drill down into our expectations much deeper than where we were at before that. And then finally, the last slide shows, it's a snapshot of the Child and Family Wellbeing Management Report. And you'll see that this period, it's a quarterly report that we're doing. So this period was January through March 2017. And you'll see the report is organized consistently with all of our other State Court Administrative Office data reports. So we categorize our counties into categories like big. We actually have a big, a large, a medium, and a small. This just shows the big county information. But as you can see, the report shows the number of events that were due during that period, the number that were timely completed, at least as indicated in my SACWIS, and the corresponding percentage. Now, at the very bottom, and also in red, where it says ICEP performance standard, that's our modified settlement agreement. So, as I mentioned, there are requirements that we have to meet in our settlement agreement with Children's Rights in order to exit the settlement agreement. So we highlight for the court where they're not meeting that mark.
And
that is our project.
Who has access to this report? Who gets this report?
So right now, and I'm sure one of your questions is going to be what phase are we in?
What phase are you in?
Yeah. We are in, I think we just completed phase 3 and we're entering phase 4. So at this point, the department generates this report for us and they send it to us, being the CIP, quarterly. We have shared it with only a couple of courts so far. And that's because, well, we wanted some quick input and feedback, but also because we're working on a number of other system improvement efforts, especially gearing up for the Child and Family Services review next year. And we want to be able to integrate this report rather than kind of throw it out there in isolation. So we're working on kind of the marketing of it and how to use it and how to best show its worth and its value to the courts.
Okay.
Did that answer your question?
Yes. Yeah. I think it's helpful. I mean, what I'm hearing is, fundamentally underlying this project is the idea that everyone is going to be looking at the same numbers and understanding. There's at least some implied agreement that those numbers are valid and important to do something about. Is that accurate?
Yes. Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Were there parts of this that you saw as you were moving it forward? Were there parts that you thought were particularly difficult or challenging?
Well, I don't think we've gotten to the real challenging part yet. I think, so we have a very good relationship with our department, CQI division, and it was a very collaborative design. I think where we will have trouble is making sure that the courts are paying attention to it and understand the value.
Do you have preliminary thoughts about how you might address some of those things? Like how do you get them to pay attention?
Yeah, well, so one other very exciting data report that's being generated we can't call it a joint project because it's just a department project, but it will show it'll be a county level Child and Family Services Review report. And that should be coming out any time now, and that's something that we've never seen before here. We get statewide information, but we've never seen it broken down by county on a monthly basis. And so that report, we are thinking about combining this report, or at least putting them together, sending them together to the courts so that they can understand the bigger picture and how these issues fit in to the child welfare system.
Got it. Well, I'd like to open up the line now. We have a few minutes here. If folks have questions that you want to just ask out loud, I'd ask Mark or Rachel or Kelly if any of you have additional points that you'd like to make or similarities that you saw through the 3 projects, things that you might want to jump in terms of kind of advice for folks moving forward. I invite that now as well. So what questions do you have or particular observations would you make for everyone?
Tim, this is Mark.
Yeah.
I would just say that even though our court improvement project in our department has a rich and long history of collaboration, the training and education events we've been doing on the safety model have been interdisciplinary, and having child welfare agency staff in the room with judges and legal stakeholders has proven to be really invaluable. And I can't really tell you how many child welfare agency staff have come up to me after the training and education events and told me how much it meant to them to understand sort of how the lawyers think and how our processes and sort of our logic model, may be a little different than the social work model, and sort of kind of what the legal worldview is, seems to have provided them a lot of comfort to kind of know how things are analyzed in the courtroom, and sort of why certain questions are asked in the way that they're asked, and sort of helping them understand due process and what that means. I think was really valuable. I think having everybody in the same room has been a really good effort. I don't think we really realized sort of how much mystery there was on the child welfare agency side about sort of some of the court processes and why things are done, the way they're done. So I thought that was a good way to think about it.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. I think anyone who's worked on multidisciplinary projects like that can appreciate that there's just different ways of thinking, and I think that's part of one of the advantages of the joint project. If you are truly collaborating and planning early on, is not only do you get that exchange in the content, but you get it in the actual planning for how it's going to work as well. So I think that's a really, really valuable point. Thank you. Any other questions or observations? David, I see that you're typing. Are you on voice with us as well?
I am. Hi, everyone. I just had a general comment. So each of the projects that were described so far either involved some type of training or maybe policy change, implementation of standards, something like that, so that people will do something differently. And I'm curious to the extent to which each of the presenters have figured out ways that they will actually know whether the behavior change that's intended is happening.
So for Rachel,
David,
Mark, and Kelly, go ahead.
So really focusing on like the so that statements. We're doing this so that something will occur, so that something else will occur. It will hopefully get you to the result you're aiming for.
David, this is Jennifer Rennie. If you don't mind, I'll take a stab at that. So if you scroll down in the Louisiana Theory of Change, you can see all the so that's, and it starts with so that knowledge and skills increase, and then gets to behavior change from the judges on the bench and also the attorneys in the representation of their clients. The measurement piece gets trickier and trickier the further you scroll down because you're talking about broader and broader outcomes. But one example about how we're going to measure the behavior change in court, and this is with Arizona, and we're in communication with Louisiana about developing a court observation instrument similar to what Arizona is utilizing. So in their court observation instrument where around their improving the permanency hearing, the quality of permanency hearings, they've added some elements around the safety decision making, maybe a half dozen or so. So we're right now collecting some baseline data about whether that inquiry is happening in court, outside of court. We're going to get that information through surveys and focus groups. And so then the idea is that in 6 to 8 months, when the rollout is complete, that the court observation that happens next fiscal year will give us some data regarding whether or not the behavior change that we hope to see from all of the activities and interventions will be occurring.
Jen, I'd just like to second that and say that, we're developing the court observation form to add some of the safety elements that we've been training on, and so that we'll have some concrete data in that regard. But then also we're going to implement the safety facilitation teams, which we expect to meet quarterly. And I'm hoping that will provide us an opportunity for some qualitative data from stakeholders who are in the courtroom day in and day out to be able to talk about, what's working and how the analyses are going, whether the language is being utilized, whether the recommendations are, based on the logic model and the assessment model that the department is using. So some qualitative and quantitative data, I think. That was one of the reasons that we decided to double back and go deeper instead of broader, was to get that, to try to nail down that part.
Thanks, Mark. This is Jen again. Another aspect of the data collection is that because this is a joint project, the Child Welfare Agency actually had brought data, both CFSR data as well as they had randomly sampled 120 cases looking specifically for the safety information. And anyhow, we analyzed that data at the CIP meeting, and they're going to continue to work with CIP on data collection with regard to case file review. So we've sort of given you a high-level overview of some of the qualitative and quantitative data sources where we're going to assess every phase of this. And obviously, ultimately, we'd like to get to improved safety outcomes, but in order to make sure that our interventions are being effective, we've got a lot of data collection elements in the interim steps.
Great. Did that answer your question, Dave? See if we maybe lost Dave on there, but okay. We're going to go on now to actually the next step. First of all, thank you very much to Rachel, Mark, and Kelly for taking the time to be interviewed here and to put together materials, and for your willingness to share with others kind of what you're working on. Kind of in that same spirit, we're going to shift to a different part of the meeting now. This is kind of a riff, if you will, off of the cork board idea. For those of you who were at the regional meetings, you remember you had a chance to kind of ask for help on things. So what you're going to see here is there are 6 different chat boxes, starting from the top left-hand corner: permanency, quality hearings, well-being, timeliness, and CQI, case management or data. Those were the 5 categories where the most people were working, and then there is one other category for everyone else. And what I'd ask you to do is if you are interested in connecting with your peers on any of these topics, to go ahead and type your name and email address in the chat. And in addition to that, you can also type in, is there something particular that you want help with? So maybe you're working on something particular about timeliness. Maybe you just want to know what other people are doing about timeliness. So I'd invite you to go ahead and connect into one of those chats. Also invite you, if you are interested in talking about what would be helpful to you. Would it be helpful for you just to sit down one time online with several other colleagues who are working on quality hearings to talk about what they're doing? Would you like to have a more long-standing community of practice, or maybe even just something as simple as an email listserv, or you want to hear about an expert talking about something in particular? So this is just kind of an open forum to go ahead and type into those. You can type into as many of them as you like. This is going to be a fairly short exercise, so I'm just going to give you about 5 minutes to do so. What questions do folks have about what we're going to do here for about the next 5 minutes? And feel free to exchange with other people in the room as well. So I'm just going to give folks maybe about 1 or 2 more minutes to finish typing. If you want to collect up quickly the names and the contact information of people in your chat box, if you click on the top right-hand corner in pod options, it should give you the opportunity to email the chat history to yourself. So that's one way to quickly gather up names. Okay. So I'm going to, you can go ahead and continue typing if you're already typing into the chat box, and I am going to turn it over to Jen to close this out.
Terrific. Thanks, Tim. And once again, thanks to Rachel, Mark, and Kelly, and also to everyone for your participation in the event today. So our next call is Tuesday, August 15th, same time. That'll be at 2 o'clock Eastern. Our topic, and this is also related to what David Kelly was saying, our topic is designing and evaluating a meaningful training. So we'll talk about training and professional development as an intervention. How do we know if it's working? And with that, we'll leave the room open for a while. And also, if you upper left-hand corner of your screen is a poll, and we use this data for our own internal evaluation. So would ask you to please complete the poll on the usefulness of today's call. And again, thanks everyone for your participation. And with that, we'll close down the phone line, but leave the room open. Thank you.